Christian and women on campus. And food justice is one of those pieces that is really of importance to us. It's one of those issues like access to healthcare, access to nutrition, access to food that cuts across all lines, and we think is a really important discussion to be having on campus. So we're really excited to have our speaker here today and to have you all here engaging in the conversation. I also have the great honor of introducing Joe Eldridge, who is our university chaplain and runs our Key Spiritual Life Center here on campus. Joe, would you come on up?
Well, we are delighted that you're here for the kickoff for the Social Justice Lecture Series. Now, some of y'all sitting in the very back, I would invite you to come up to the very front. We're going to have a conversation, discussion. Now, to kick this Social Justice Lecture Series off, we invited the Pope, but he had another commitment, couldn't come, but sent Alexander Moore in his place.
It's a big drop.
Maybe not, maybe not. Now, I'm serious about this, folks. I mean, come on up. And those of you who are standing in the back, please. Now, let me say very quickly, I don't know if there are any, I just got an email from Oxfam America. Anybody familiar with Oxfam? You've heard of Oxfam? Oxfam has a series of, they help nurture students in organizing hunger banquets to bring attention to the issue of hunger and the politics surrounding hunger. If anybody wants to step up and help organize a hunger banquet on this campus, would you please, get in touch with me? And I think there's an Oxfam Club or the Oxfam Club. That's it's something to be mindful of. Now, Alexander we're privileged to have this young man. He has done a lot in his young life. He is now called the Chief Development Officer. That's CDO. You ever heard of that? Now you've heard of it. CDO, Chief Development Officer for DC Central Kitchen. How many of you have heard of DC Central Kitchen? Wow. So it doesn't really need much of an introduction. Alexander also has written a book called The Food Fighters. And that really traces the history of this remarkably creative, innovative approach to hunger, which has been the model for programs, frankly, around the country and perhaps probably around the world. The Food Fighters shows, and I'm going to read this, shows how Egger's innovative approach to combating hunger and creating opportunity has changed lives and why the organization is more relevant today than ever before. This retrospective goes beyond the simplistic moralizing used to describe the work of many nonprofits by interviewing dozens of DC Central Kitchen leaders, staff, clients, stakeholders for the past 2.5 decades. So they do a lot more than serve food, and but some food is available to us at the conclusion of this program. So, Alexander, come on up here and tell us about the DC Central Kitchen and how it's battling hunger and advancing justice.
Right on. Thank you,
right.
Joe. Appreciate it. So I'm not going to use the mic. I don't like podiums because they get in the way of my awkward hand gestures. So I'm going to wander somewhat awkwardly up here as best I can, all right? Before I get started, I always like to know who the heck I'm talking to. So very minimal audience participation, I promise. But who here are students here at AU? Okay. All right, cool. Faculty? Faculty? Rock on. Staff? Love staff at universities. You guys make the student life and growth that happens here on campus truly possible. Any community members here? Nonprofit partners? Okay, awesome. All right, yeah, everybody's sort of a half partner in the nonprofit sector because you've always got multiple jobs, right? Okay, cool. So I think if anybody came here, specifically here about DC Central Kitchen, let me know. All right, okay. Anybody here come to talk about food justice? All right. Anything else? Was I supposed to talk about anything else? Yeah? What? Any other reasons why people are here? Vague curiosity? All right. Mostly food justice and snacks. DC Central Kitchen snacks over here? Okay. If you came for a theoretical conversation that would allow us to develop a more meaningful working definition of food justice, you're going to be grossly disappointed, okay? That's not my jam. I'm a recovering academic, but there's a reason I left, right? And that's not a knock on the importance of theory and definitions and structural and systemic conversations, but I really love being a practitioner. Right? I really love being down in the trenches and using theory and structural conversations and moral conversations to inform the work that I do and that DC Central Kitchen does every day. And I hope that's kind of where we can operate today, at that intersection of theory and practice. Does anybody know what food justice is? Everybody so far has used the term, right? And half of you are here to hear about it. So anybody got any sort of spitball definitions? Anything that you looked up before you walked in to know what you were getting yourself into? No? No? Okay. All right. All right. So we're just going to spitball this from here. All right. So a quick and dirty Google search told me that food justice is basically a framework, right? And it's looking at opportunities to look at the equitability of the way we distribute the costs and benefits and the risks and opportunities of the way that we grow, process, distribute, and consume food. Okay? Does that seem like a reasonable, quick and dirty definition to look at it in terms of, are we getting closer to food justice? Are we moving away from food justice? Is our food system more or less just? Okay? Cool? All right. That's probably the last time I'm going to talk about food justice specifically for the next 40 minutes. All right? Because what I want to talk about is DC Central Kitchen, right? Not to make it an infomercial, but to hold us up through that lens of food justice and kind of see how we did. I would say that food justice is not a term that was popular 10 years ago, right? I don't know that I had heard the term food justice 10 years ago, and I do this for a living, right? But I think it's an interesting theoretical construct to think about because, to Sarah's point, it cuts across lots of issues, right? Food justice can't exist in a vacuum, right? But I think food, because everybody eats it, right? Lots of people, grow it. Lots of people process it. Lots of people's careers are based around food. It's a really tangible way to plug into larger conversations about class, about economic opportunity, about race, about gender, about geography and nationality. And food is a way to kind of have a tangible way to start some of those conversations and look at the way these larger debates, these larger issues, these larger identities affect our daily life, okay? So that's about as far into food justice as I'm going to get. I hope you're not too disappointed, all right? For those of you that are students, is anybody nervous about what you're doing after you graduate? Someone unsure? Yeah? No? Anybody super confident? Already into medical school? All right, we got one super confident person. Touchdown, AU faculty and staff, all right? So I think where I want to start, I said I wasn't going to do a DC Central Kitchen infomercial. I'm definitely not going to do an Alex Moore infomercial, and I'm certainly not going to do an infomercial for The Food Fighters, DC Central Kitchen's first 25 years in the front lines of hunger and poverty, available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. But I do want to tell you how I kind of got into this line of work because Chief Development Officer is not a normal job title, right? Nobody in kindergarten was thinking about, boy, I can't wait till I'm a director of development at a direct service nonprofit, right? Nobody did that. I wanted to be a bodybuilder. That didn't work out. So I grew up in northern Maine. Anybody here from Maine? Touchdown, I'll count it. Close enough. I grew up in Bangor, right, which is in the northern half of Maine. And it's the second biggest city in Maine with 30,000 people, okay? I grew up surrounded by rural poverty. I grew up with tons of privilege, newsflash. I'm a white, heterosexual, cisgendered, upper middle class white male from northern Maine, right? It's a pretty good time in America to be that, right? There's never been a bad time in America to be that. But so I grew up surrounded by rural poverty, and like many millennials, and I am going to call myself a millennial, I've been 30 for a month, so I think I'm sort of on the other side of the millennial generation, right? I grew up around community service. Anybody here have to do community service in high school? Anybody here do community service regularly now? Like so many millennials, I was raised on this stuff. My first community service project, I was in 7th grade, right, doing literacy tutoring for 3rd graders who were in summer school. And it felt good. And my mom said, you know that warm and fuzzy feeling you get when you go and read to these 3rd graders? Don't you want that all the time? Don't you want to do good things for other people all the time? And I'm sure, like many of you, it felt really good to do that, right? You kind of get addicted to it. You want to be a good person. You want to help others, right? But I looked at all the community service hours I was racking up through high school, and I looked at my community, and I was sort of unsure as to whether or not any of these hours that I was putting in was actually helping the kids I was working with, right? Anybody have that moment of doubt? I was very unsure looking at the economic conditions of my town as to whether or not things were getting better for the kids that were younger than me. And I started to wonder, what's the point of all this community service? Is it just a graduation requirement, right? Anybody else have that sort of moment of concern? So I went off to college, right? I went to Ithaca College in upstate New York. I know we've got some Ithaca love here in the audience. Two? Right, rock on. We're everywhere. It's like Mainers, you can't stay in Maine. Ithaca graduates can't stay in Ithaca, New York either. Have to come south. And so, I studied politics and writing, liberal arts majors in the house, yeah? Those are the people that are especially concerned about what the hell you do after you graduate, right? And so junior year, I'm studying politics and writing, and I knew I wanted to do a semester in Washington, D.C. So I called my dad, Harvard-educated banker. And I said, Dad, I'm looking at these two classes, I really think I want to take autobiography. And my dad said, son, you're a white upper-middle-class male from northern Maine. Nobody wants to read your book, right? And he was completely freaking right? So he said, what you should do is take that other class you're thinking about, proposals, grants, and reports. Because if you want to get an internship at a respectable Washington, D.C. economic think tank, you should have to write something decent and technical and not that foofy crap you're writing in all your liberal arts classes, right? So I took my dad's advice. And on the first day of the class, I heard from the professor, Patricia Spencer, who said, I know that the class is called Proposals, Grants, and Reports. What this really is about building change agents for the nonprofit sector. We're going to study nonprofit management. We're going to write a live grant for a local nonprofit. And the first thing we're going to do is read Begging for Change by a guy named Robert Egger, the founder of DC Central Kitchen. You can kind of guess where this story is going. But I'm going to make you listen to it anyway. It's the power of the microphone. So read Robert's book, and it was passionate, it was pragmatic, it was really fucking profane. He probably set a record for F-bombs in a nonfiction book, certainly in a book about nonprofit management and helping people who are hungry. And I was captivated, right? He made the same movie references to all the old movies that I loved, Casablanca, It's a Wonderful Life, and I said, I gotta meet this guy. So I sent an email to info@dccentralkitchen.org. Sure enough, Robert Egger himself emails me back and says, dude, you want an internship? We've never had anybody write grants for us as an intern. You got it. P.S. Can't believe anybody read my book. See you in 6 weeks. So we have a culture of sort of very thinly read books here at DC Central Kitchen. And so 6 weeks later, winter of 2006, I was in the basement of America's largest homeless shelter at 425 2nd Street, writing grants for DC Central Kitchen. I loved it. I was passionate about it. But I still had this nagging feeling to go to graduate school, right? But let me hit the pause button before I carry on with my recovering academic story and talk about DC Central Kitchen, right? A lot of you have heard of us, right? Some of you may actually know what we do. But the story that I read in Begging for Change is what totally diverted my otherwise perfectly normal and successful life path and has me here yammering on at you today. Robert Egger was not a social worker. Robert Egger was not a chief executive officer. Robert Egger was not a philanthropist. Robert Egger was a 27-year-old foul-mouthed nightclub manager with a high school education who had never done anything for anybody when he founded DC Central Kitchen. All right? So, it's a little bit different. It's why we swear so much in public. It's part of our organizational culture. Robert had a classic story, and it's that, we've all heard this, right? Boy meets girl, boy falls for girl, girl drags boy out on community service activity, right? And so Robert was happily tending bar in his nightclub in Washington, D.C., really wanted to be Rick from Casablanca. Who here has seen Casablanca? That's actually really good. That number of hands goes down every time I ask that question. It's embarrassing, people. Watch it. Great date movie. Go use it, all right? And so he wanted to be Rick from Casablanca, even had the white Humphrey Bogart jacket, right? And beautiful blonde walks into his bar, name's Claudia, falls in love, and she says, hey, I want to get married. I want to get married in a church. Even though we're not church-going people, we want to do that. And as soon as they started going to this church, the existing congregants said, ooh, fresh meat for our volunteer program. Let's get those guys, right? They're young, they're energetic, we can use them. And this church here in Washington, D.C., had a program called the Great Patrol. You may have heard of it. It's still in existence. GRATE. And it was that classic, meaningful, important church basement style operation that was all volunteer led, the congregants took turns. It cycled between different churches here in Washington, D.C. every night of the week. They would go to a fancy grocery store in Georgetown, buy whatever meal ingredients they could with the money that they had allocated for this all-volunteer program, prepare the best meals that they could, usually soups and stews and some coffee and some soft fruits that people who may not have strong teeth would be able to bite into, and then go out on the streets and serve it in downtown Washington, D.C. to lines of homeless people, right? This is the quintessential good work, right? It's what the Pope did yesterday, right? It's good work. And so Robert, who had never, like I said, done anything for anybody and calls himself to this day a recovering hypocrite, went out on the street and had a series of epiphanies. He said, you know, I'm a businessman. I work in nightclubs and restaurants every single day. Where you're getting this food seems kind of expensive. The way that you're preparing this food doesn't adhere to basic food sanitation practices, right? You're not using hairnets. You're not using, menu planning. The nutritional quality of what you're putting together isn't actually great. And then what bothered Robert most was when he went out on the street and you had this Pavlovian line of men and women who were standing in the rain waiting for a cup of soup and a cup of coffee. At the end of the volunteer shift, all these volunteers who had this meaningful community service experience looked at each other and said, man, this was great. Thanks for coming out, everybody. See you next week. But they could have just as easily said the exact same thing to the line of men and women behind them waiting in the rain for that cup of soup and that cup of coffee. Because nothing in that transaction had liberated the people standing in line from the conditions that had them needing free soup and free coffee in the rain. And so it wasn't that the work was bad, but it got under Robert's skin that said, this can't be all there is. This can't be all there is to fighting hunger. This can't be all there is to fighting homelessness. Why do we tolerate the continued existence of these problems? Let's rearrange what we have and build a better system, right? Build a better organization. And Claudia said, Robert, go to bed. This is good work. Leave it alone. We don't need to be doing this. You're saving up for your big fancy nightclub that you want to own yourself. And Robert couldn't let it go. And so because he was a 27-year-old with no high school education and big dreams of running a nightclub, nobody would actually invest in his nightclub. So he decided to start DC Central Kitchen to show he could run something, and eventually he would inspire somebody to give him $3 million to open his own nightclub. This was not meant to be a lifetime gig, all right? It became that. So DC Central Kitchen's operation, and I'm about to be done with this opening infomercial, I promise, was to say, look, let's take food that's already going to waste. Hotels, restaurants, nightclubs, all across DC, all the people Robert already drank with after his shift. Ask them to donate the food they're already going to throw away to an operation with vehicles that could go out and get that food in a safe and effective way. Bring all that donated food to a central kitchen, hence the name, where it could be aggregated and re-prepared to create higher quality, more nutritious meals for less money. Instead of distributing the meals itself, this operation would give meals away to all the other nonprofits in DC that had clients who were hungry but needed additional services to be liberated from the conditions of hunger and poverty. Halfway houses, drug rehabilitation programs, GED programs, after-school programs. All these organizations across DC are spending money on food and labor, but providing a pretty low-quality product. What if DC Central Kitchen could be the back-of-house FedEx for healthy food made out of leftover products in DC? But most importantly, and I think this is where I think we can have some rumbling about food justice. Robert said we need to put at the middle of this operation a job training program. Because ultimately, we're not going to feed our way out of hunger. Today, DC Central Kitchen does 5,000 meals every single day for the city's nonprofits and shelters. We can do 50,000. People will still be hungry tomorrow. Food's not going to end hunger, because it doesn't get at the root causes as to why people need free food. Hunger is derivative of poverty. So let's train men and women who may be standing in line for food, people who may be homeless, have histories of incarceration, may have histories of drug addiction, chronic unemployment, abuse, or trauma. Train them in the culinary arts. It's going to be a rough, tough love culinary school, and it's going to be quick with the idea of getting people back into the workforce as fast as possible. But part of their training is going to be preparing these very meals for their community every day. Instead of this strange divorce system where we have the helpers, right? The white folks coming in from the suburbs to do good in blighted urban areas, right? We're actually going to put people to work to be part of their own liberation. This was the core concept of DC Central Kitchen. And then, once they finished that program, hey, Robert already knew all the nightclubs and restaurants in DC because he was drinking with them after hours, and we're already giving them tax receipts for the food that they were throwing away and losing money on. Why wouldn't they hire our graduates, right? Because we're already into them, right? That was DC Central Kitchen, 1989. Joe made a point. He said, hey, this is a great innovative organization. I think it's embarrassing that all that still sounds pretty innovative today, 26 years later, right? How do we still talk about feeding people, right? I'm not interested in serving clients. I'm interested in creating colleagues at DC Central Kitchen and across the hospitality sector, right? So DC Central Kitchen plugged along, and it was that story that captivated me as a college student that said, hey, I gotta be part of this. Isn't this cool? They even have a catering company staffed by their own graduates that work for them full time and delivers delicious breakfast like the one over here, right? With branded water bottles that we designed ourselves. I said, I gotta be part of this. So I showed up and wrote grants for DC Central Kitchen. That was 2006. We were still sort of riding high on the artificial economic growth of the early 2000s. 2008 rolls along, right? I'm in graduate school. I finished my internship at the kitchen. But the recession was a game changer for all of us in the nonprofit sector. It was certainly different for universities. It was different for for-profit businesses. It was certainly different for the government. But DC Central Kitchen was not going to be spared. And so what the kitchen said was, look, there are a couple pieces here. If the bottom just dropped out of the economy, that means that the charitable pie that nonprofits like us rely on is about to get a whole hell of a lot smaller. Because when markets crash, nonprofits are supposed to be the airbags. Problem is, for most people, doing good is a luxury good. So when times are good, hey, go ahead, AU, here's $50 million for a new building, name it after me, right? When times are bad, people say, I don't have $250 to give to a homeless shelter, right? That's bizarre. But that's how we have things set up in this system, right? We aren't counter-cyclical in the way that we work with nonprofits. So DC Central Kitchen said, one, we're gonna have less money. Two, we're gonna have more clients. More people are gonna drop out of the labor market, more people will be homeless, more people will need training. Three, if our budget's gonna be smaller and we're gonna have to serve more people, we're gonna have to find a way to serve more people with less money without cutting services. Lots of people in this line of work said, hey, we gotta protect the institution, folks. We can't do anybody any good if we're out of business in 5 years. DC Central Kitchen, we think it's our job to put ourselves out of business, right? So we said we can't be irresponsible with our money, but we've got to reduce the cost for each individual that we want to serve and engage, right? And finally, we said, look, this restricted funding problem, anybody familiar with the term restricted funding? It's when somebody gives money to a nonprofit and says, this is the purpose for it. And nonprofits are very guilty because we say, oh, we would love to take your restricted money, thank you very much, right? We're part of the problem. But we said, look, in times like this, when everything is suddenly different, what made sense in a grant agreement a year ago or 2 years ago doesn't make sense right now in the face of a recession. We need more of our own money to determine how we want to spend it so we can be a business responding to this crisis. We got to earn more of our own scratch, right? So this is where this sort of response to the recession comes in, which I put into the name of my talk because Dania needed a name of my talk immediately, and that's what I put into it. So we looked at our food costs, number one, and said, we're spending way too much money on food, which is weird because I just told you how we use all leftover food that was already going to waste. Turns out, doing 300 meals a day, you can do with restaurant leftovers. When the city's asking you to do 5,000 meals a day and feed the entire homeless shelter network, guess what? Can't rely on random donations and random acts of kindness to provide that type of quality service, right? So we had started purchasing food, largely from internationally. We had crates and crates of tomatoes from Belgium. And our CEOs thought, that can't possibly make sense, right? How is that cheaper than getting it from Virginia? Turns out people thought it was, but it wasn't. We said, so let's start looking at local farms. Farms in the Shenandoah, farms in the Piedmont, farms in the eastern shore of Maryland. Maybe these mid-sized farmers that are now also being affected by the recession are looking for new buyers, right? Anybody here been to a farmer's market? Everybody here likes farmer's markets, right? Farmer's markets are adorable. You got the guy in the straw hat handing you these beautiful apples for $3.50 each, right? I mean, who doesn't love a farmer? You got a reusable bag, God help you if you walk in there with a plastic bag, right? Or a reusable bag that says Walmart and you get booed, right? So everybody loves farmers markets. The problem is they're shitty business for farmers. Anybody realize that? Because it's all retail. And the only things that you're buying, because you're gonna pay $3.50 for a perfect apple, you're buying a supermodel of Apple, of the Apple world, right? They're only using the finest products that they can bring in, and the farmer's driving in from West Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, to staff this farmer's market instead of growing stuff on their farm, which is their job, right? So we said, what if we went to the farms? What if we identified these mid-sized family farms within about 150 miles of DC? We got trucks. Let's just buy directly from these farmers. We can go wholesale. And yeah, we'll buy the beautiful stuff, the occasional Kate Upton of apples, like that's fine. But why don't we also buy the stuff that's a little bit ugly, a little bit wrong shaped, sweet potatoes the size of footballs. That's 40% of everything we grow in America, and we leave it on the farm to rot. There's huge environmental cost to that, right? You think about methane production. But we're also putting water and labor into every single one of those products, and it's not making it off the farm. Well, if you happen to have a commercial kitchen with 15,000 volunteers armed with knives, by the time you slice and dice all those ugly yams and sweet potatoes and tomatoes, nobody's going to know the difference. So we said, why don't we buy all this stuff at a discount? It's better business for the farmer, it's better business for us. And it's stuff that we couldn't buy from any other wholesaler. And while we're out there, we'll take donations of stuff that even the farmer thinks is too ugly to charge us for, right? So we said, great, we'll take all this stuff. So we became a locally sourced organization. And in the process, this is kind of interesting to think about, the homeless population in Washington, D.C. became locavores. Kind of an interesting concept. Number 2, this comes back to the money thing, right? So the food changed, right? But as the food got better in terms of what we were putting out there, we went from taking 10,000 pounds a year of delivered pizza, right, donated to us. I won't name any chains, I don't want to get in trouble, but delivered, mass-produced pizza. And we were distributing that. We said, well, if we actually get raw, unprepared stuff from these local farms and these wholesalers that are struggling to find buyers, well, we can prepare higher quality, more nutritious meals that don't look like shelter gruel, right? And that had always been the perception of DC Central Kitchen. You're using wasted food. It must be dirty and bad, right? So our meals got more nutritious. It changed the perception. And so people were more willing to do business with us and actually buy our products. We said, look, why don't we get into school meals? Right? Anybody here watch Jamie Oliver's short-lived television show? He made, healthy school meals cool for a while. We were way ahead of Jamie Oliver on this stuff, right? So in 2008, we started doing healthy school meals in addition to feeding shelters and nonprofits, and we were getting paid for those meals. And lastly, we said, look, it's not just enough to earn money. The way we actually make that money has to be in line with our food justice values as well, right? We need to create jobs for our own culinary graduates. Because when the bottom dropped out in 2008, guess what? There were people with college degrees and master's degrees who were fighting for entry-level hospitality industry positions, right? Don't blame me one bit. But it makes somebody with a criminal record that much less desirable, right? Somebody who may have a history of addiction or homelessness. Suddenly you're competing with people with lots of formal education, right? So we said if our graduates are going to have a harder time getting jobs, we need to hire them ourselves as much as we can. And if we're going to do that, we're not going to go that same old nonprofit rate of paying people substandard wages and demeaning their labor and saying it's good enough. We can solve these trillion-dollar problems with low skill and volunteer labor and leftover shit. We're not going to do that. We're going to run ourselves like a business, a good business. So today, DC Central Kitchen still serves 5,000 meals for the city's homeless shelters. We also serve 6,300 scratch-cooked, locally sourced meals in DC public and private schools, targeting low-income children. We have 60 of our own graduates on staff. They earn a living wage of $14.05 an hour to start, eligible for annual raises and holiday bonuses. We pay 100% of their health insurance costs. They have no shared regular insurance payment. And we match their retirement savings 100%. Because if you're getting your first job at 45 or 50 after a long stint of incarceration, you deserve a chance at a decent retirement. People told us those types of objectives were insane, right? Completely freaking crazy. But we wanted to be a little bit contrarian. It goes back to Robert's desire to show people he could run a nightclub, right? Once we started doing school food, we realized, man, why don't we really try to push nutritional envelope? In the first month of our DC Public Schools contract, we said, let's serve hummus. Wrong idea. Don't serve hummus to third graders. Doesn't matter what their socioeconomic status is, third graders do not like hummus. Lesson learned. The problem was, it wasn't just that, if kids aren't consuming these meals, they aren't getting basic nutrition, and even when they're relying on free and reduced price school meals. What it actually led was parents coming into school and saying, I'm looking at these menus you guys put together. These gourmet menus we had inspired, and they said, this doesn't look like what I'm serving my kids at home. What are you trying to tell me about what I'm serving my kids, the type of parent I am? Why should I be encouraging my kid to eat this stuff if he can't get it out of school? And we were like, oh man, we really screwed that one up, all right? So within the first month, we said, look, we got to go back to the drawing board. We took the old menus that the previous school food provider had I assume everybody here grew up with some measure of school food, right? The straight from freezer to deep fryer to styrofoam tray pipeline, right? That's what I had. That's how most school food in America works, and there's a reason for that. But we said, look, all right, they serve pizza. Okay, we can serve pizza. Let's make it healthy. Let's do it on whole grain French bread. Let's use locally sourced heirloom tomatoes, prepared in our kitchens, make scratch sauce, use reduced fat mozzarella in a side salad. So kids actually say, oh, I know what the hell that is, right? Tilapia was a bridge too far. But that allowed us to build trust. It allowed us to build trust with the students, allowed us to build trust with the parents, and now we have the highest participation rates and principal approval rates of any school food vendor in Washington, D.C. Our schools are primarily located in Ward 7, east of the Anacostia River, 1 in Ward 8, and 2 in Ward 5. Okay? This is part of our mission. Nearly every school that we serve, 100% of students are eligible for a free and reduced price lunch. And they're getting scratch-cooked, locally sourced meals, 3 meals a day from us. Very quickly, it's like everybody read a book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Anybody read that? This is the problem with food justice, right? You just take one step and you're like, awesome, that was really cool. Oh shit, this is way deeper than I thought, right? We said, look, go outside of the school grounds. We're serving beautiful local produce in schools on reusable, biodegradable trays. Where are they going to get this at home? There's no grocery stores. The grocery stores that do exist in these neighborhoods don't stock high-quality produce because they don't think that population is going to buy it. We said, all right, I guess it's our job to fix this too. So we looked at corner stores. And in partnership with DC government, we now have 67 corner stores in Washington, D.C.'s food deserts. I assume I can use the term food desert. Everybody knows some working definition of what that is. That get a free refrigerator from us because they wouldn't otherwise stock fresh produce. They get shelving units. They get training on how to handle fresh produce. And for the first month, deliveries are free. So they actually get to test if there's a market for this. So we can bust the myth that those neighborhoods don't want fresh, healthy, decent, dignified food. We're going to sell over 140,000 units of fresh produce and healthy snacks through those corner stores. Tiny corner stores, right? About as big as this podium, right? Are stocking fresh, beautiful produce, sourced locally whenever possible today. And in that way, we're trying to provide a wraparound approach so that kids who are getting our meals in school, getting meals from DC Center Kitchen after school, and on the block, they can walk to a corner store and their parents can get the exact same ingredients that are going into their school meals with free recipe cards and cooking demonstrations about how to actually replicate it at home. So, you don't think I'm completely making this up. I do have a brief video. I'm hoping this is still live and active, and I hope this works. So, hopefully this is not going to be buffering. I'm going to take a chance. AV team, we good? We rocking? All right, let's do it. This is proof in the pudding. You'll hear directly from one of my, as I said, colleagues, Howard Thomas, who works at Washington Jesuit Academy as part of our school food team.
change somebody's life in the city, we're pleased to be a part of that.
Look what we do. We feed kids healthy meals every day. 3,500 DC public school kids. Because some of these kids, man, when they go home, they're not getting meals. At least they know when they come to school, they're going to receive a good meal.
The food here, it's always healthy and it's always good. Always have a salad, vegetables, always have something like calcium, protein. How do you feel about it, Aaron?
I feel great. I love the fruit because every time we get a fruit every meal.
I like to have a good meal before I go to class so I can be on task and I can be ready to start my day.
How do you like the vegetables and the fruit? The colors are a little much and
DC Central Kitchen has changed my life, and in the process, I am changing these kids' life. My name is Howard Thomas, and I'm a graduate of DC Central Kitchen.
My name is Dennis Showalter, and I'm the manager here at the auction. But only a small part of the picture.
Wow.
Thank you.
It is, though, man. DC Central Kitchen is the mom.
Yeah, close out of that real quick. A couple things in that. One, that film is now almost 5 years old, so the number's a little outdated. I wasn't making things up, I promise. Howard is one of now 1,500 graduates of DC Central Kitchen. Since the recession of 2008, we've produced 600 of those graduates with a 90% job placement rate. I love that film. When I came back from spending way too much time in graduate school in 2010, Howard sort of embodied the kitchen strategic shift to saying, how do we recruit, train, and employ men and women coming home from prison? That wasn't always part of our target population. I hate that term, but I haven't come up with anything truly better. And I said, this isn't quite the same organization I left. I never met anybody who had been locked up before. Never had a friend who had been locked up. And I said, is this really us? The kitchen had crunched the numbers and looked at and saying, look, this is hands down the most marginalized population of Washington, D.C. They are representative of every other marginalized population in Washington, D.C. because of our school-to-prison pipeline. And this is where we can have the most impact from a social perspective and from an economic perspective. The ex-offender unemployment rate nationwide is 68%. It's also our recidivism rate. It's staggering, right? In 3 years, 68% of people will go back to prison, primarily because they don't have the economic opportunity to choose a different path, right? DC Central Kitchen said, this is where we're going to draw the line in the sand, and this is where we're going to make a difference. So I was very quickly converted, all right? And one of the reasons I had come back to the kitchen is I had just a sick taste in my mouth, because at some point when I was in graduate school, I said, man, sure I'm glad I'm waiting out the recession in grad school. And I was like, what? Who said that? Who is that asshole, right? And as soon as I said that, I felt this bubbling thing about, well, there are people that aren't waiting this out, and they're actually doing something. And it's those people back in that basement of that homeless shelter at DC Central Kitchen. So I had the chance to come back, and I have been there now for 5 years. I say that not because I'm special. I say that specifically because I'm not special. And so I do want to put in a shameless plug for the Campus Kitchens Project. Anybody here familiar with that? Yes, awesome. The Campus Kitchens Project was started in 2001 by Robert Egger. The dude had two great ideas, right? That's like the iPod and the iPhone. It's incredible. Robert got tired of people coming to Washington, D.C. and saying, hey, this is a really great idea. This is really innovative. How come there isn't one in Boston or Detroit or New York or Wichita or Topeka? And he said, all right, well, I can't start that. DC Center Kitchen has never really had the capacity to do that and replicate themselves. And quite frankly, we're an organization saying we can do what we do with leftover food, leftover kitchens, people that have been cast aside by society. Do we really need a new executive director and finance director and board of directors in every city in America to soak up money and resources to do this work? How can we do this faster? How can we do it smarter? How can we do it better? And most importantly, how can we engage all these young people that have been raised on community service and had the same moment of doubt that Robert had on that truck serving people on the street? Is this making a difference? Is this worth it? So today, Campus Kitchens is now on 51 campuses across the country. We have 20,000 students who are volunteering with the Campus Kitchens project every year, using idle, generally cafeteria facilities on campus, surplus food, both from on-campus providers and in the community, to prepare 300,000 meals all across the country every year, preventing 1 million pounds of food waste every single year. And we have a campus kitchen at Washington, D.C. David, my partner over here, runs that. Find him later, okay? Campus Kitchen in Washington, D.C. is sources volunteers from AU, Georgetown, GW, Howard, everywhere, every educational institution in D.C. You can sign up for a volunteer shift and be part of this work right down in Glover Park, right? So check that out and be part of it. Because the hope is, yeah, you'll make a difference, right? You'll prevent food waste, you'll serve meals, awesome. It's meaningful, important work. The cooler part is that you can have that epiphany of, is this making a difference? In a safe space with a network of 20,000 other people who are demanding better from the nonprofit sector, right? So my hope, and our hope with Campus Kitchens, is that every year, that's about 4,000 or 5,000 people who are graduating, saying, I want a career where I can do well and do good and make a difference, right? I don't have to choose, I don't have to do a service project for 2 years and then you'll get a real job making real money, right? How many people have heard the real job comment from their parents? Screw that, all right? Earlier, I called my dad a banker, and that's true. Difference is he's a community banker in rural Maine who does Community Reinvestment Act work. So primarily, he's working with Native American tribes to help them build more high-quality, affordable housing and launch social enterprises and new businesses so they can actually succeed and become more economically sustainable and be part of the community. So you can even find things in the for-profit sector that make a difference and are positive. And quite frankly, in the age of Citizens United, all the good people can't afford to be poor, right? Somebody's have to go into the for-profit sector and be successful and use that money for good, okay? I think I had some other shameless plug I was going to do, but I'll hit the brakes there. Don't compromise, guys, right? This is a university. You can afford to be uncompromising, right? For us, the values of food justice, I don't know how often we actually say food justice in meetings. We use it more in public talks so that we can say we know what the hell we're talking about, because it's a cool topic. But the fact is, our mission, these values of economic inclusion, right? Giving people a second chance no matter where they're coming from. The idea that we're all part of the solution, right? That it can't be charity over here and philanthropy over here. Nonprofit over here, business over here, and government lording above all with terrible strategic plans, right? We have to find ways to work together, and I would challenge all of you to not compromise on finding careers that bring those things together. I'm fortunate that I get to do a little bit of that every single day. And like I said, I'm not special. So, and all I've done is fail upwards. So you absolutely can find a way to fail upwards too, I promise. Maybe you'll even succeed upwards. I'll stop there. I don't have a good closing line. I assume we're gonna do a lot of Q&A. So let's rumble. I appreciate all of you being here today, and I hope you're not too disappointed that I didn't talk about food justice that much, all right? Questions, concerns? Are people just ready for snacks? Really? Nobody's offended? Somebody's got to be offended. Yeah?
So you were saying that when you guys transferred from food waste into more buying from the farmers and stuff, so what happened to the food waste then? Have you guys continued to use that or no?
We recover more surplus pounds of food every single year. What we did was we moved up the food chain, right? People seen Just Eat It, the food waste documentaries on MSNBC. There's a couple food waste documentaries going around these days where they just show these dumpsters and dumpsters and pounds of like leftover yogurt to show how much food waste there is in America. And that's absolutely true. We found that by moving up the food chain to where most waste is, which is at the farm and the wholesale level, you guys will probably be offended if there's leftover donuts here, right, at the end of this talk. Only 10% of food waste in America actually happens at the table level or after the table, right? Most of it's in the industrial food system that we never even see. So when our community was coming to us saying, hey, we know you used to do 300 meals or 1,000 meals a day, we need you to do 5,000 every single day, on time, twice a day, we said we need more raw, unprepared product. So a lot of it is donated. About 800,000 pounds a year right here in Washington, D.C. goes to D.C. Central Kitchen. And we have a fabulous partnership with the food bank. People volunteered at Capitol Area Food Bank before? Great partner of ours. If you think about a food bank, it's a big warehouse, just centered around food. Very efficient, very effective at moving dry goods and canned goods through communities down to food pantries, right? That's what they do. Community kitchens like D.C. Central Kitchen are really good with protein and produce because to move those products before sell-by dates, to add value to them, because what do you do with a giant head of broccoli, right? Like that's not always a great thing to give to somebody in need or a family that's strapped for time and resources to prepare that, right? When you have the processing capacity of a kitchen, you can take 3,000 pounds of strawberries in a single shot, process them for salads, dehydrate the rest, and get them into trail mix. A food bank without a kitchen attached can't do that. So that's why we pass back and forth about 200,000 pounds of surplus goods. We don't have any storage capacity for dry goods and canned goods, not to mention nothing stays in our facility for more than 18 hours because it's all going right into the food system. Whereas they can send us their protein and produce because by the time a pallet of lettuce gets down through the food bank and food pantry system, only so much of it's going to still be usable. Am I right, David? Am I totally making stuff up? You're the expert. Rock and roll. Awesome. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on introducing these kind of quote-unquote urban gardens and nutrition education to supplement the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, I mean, what's really been interesting, I would say, is that food has gotten to become a super sexy cause. At the same time, food porn has become an acceptable term, right? And I have a real problem with sort of the pornography of food in America right now, and this foodie culture. It's been really good for us in that people are interested in food. It's a great gateway drug for caring about DC Central Kitchen, but carried out to its natural extent, it's totally bizarre some of the things people are doing with sort of idolizing and glamorizing food. That said, I think understanding where our food comes from is really important. And so the more divorced I think we get as a society from the way food is produced and processed and how we produce protein products from live animals, right? It sort of cheapens your appreciation for it, right? So I do think it's really important. What's interesting, and I think Washington, D.C. is a great case study of this is, everybody familiar with the concept of comparative advantage? Am I taking microecon? Yeah? All right, cool, good, way to go, liberal arts. Comparative advantage, right? If you're good at something, you should specialize it. Even if you're not as good at it, you should specialize in it and let somebody else specialize in something else, right? A tiny urban marketplace without, congressional representation that has a very defined border, probably not going to be a great agricultural producer, right? Especially when people can't afford to get a one-bedroom apartment in Washington, D.C. And our biggest challenge is affordable housing. Rural areas are good at farming. Cities are good at stacking people on top of each other, right? And consolidating, laborers and workers and economic activity. Rural communities can grow food. Are community gardens, I think, important for education, connecting people who are living in urban environments to where food comes from? Absolutely. Helping people make better dietary choices? Totally awesome hands-on teaching tools. Is urban gardening going to feed Washington, D.C.? Absolutely freaking not. And so when I get a call from, a social impact investor who says, I really want to invest in urban agriculture, can you tell me if, this one urban farm has a sustainable business model? Sure, all right. What are they charging for lettuce? $4 for a head of lettuce. Nope. And this is the crazy thing is so many people are into urban agriculture saying, look, people are living in food deserts. Low-income people don't have access to food. Let's grow food. If it's $4 for a head of lettuce, you're not helping your target population, right? Target population. So let's use it as an incubator. Let's use it to teach. And by all means, let's grow rooftop gardens and sideways gardens and hydroponic. Awesome. Let's throw all of it at the system and see what's going to work so people can actually reorient their diets around more fresh fruits and vegetables, right? But we're not going to do this with backyard plots and assume that's going to fix the problem. We grow and waste tons of food in America. We need to build better systems so that farmers can make money and be more financially secure, and that we can more equitably distribute the food that we're growing. That was kind of a food justice answer. Thanks for steering me towards that. I eventually got there. Yeah.
You mentioned protein products, but later in the video or in your talk, you really talk about how you source your protein. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we try to use locally sourced beef when we can. The fact is, I would say the industrial scale of protein production is such that it's a very hard thing to do for small and mid-sized family farms, right? Especially at the price points we have to operate at. We provide a 4-ounce serving of protein with every single meal we provide to shelters and nonprofits in Washington, D.C. That's hard, right? That's actually really, really challenging. And we've gotten contacted by people that care about animal rights or promoting vegan diets to say, hey, you should do more meatless meals, right? Like, why are we using these resource-intensive protein products called animals to feed people, right? Why can't you just do veggie meals? And, we have to be pragmatists, right? Like, Americans eat meat, dude. Like, newsflash, they do. And I don't think it's necessarily our place to say, because somebody is low income and relying on our meals, that we say, guess what, you get to be a vegan now. I'm not really prepared to do that. So what we know that we have to kind of get everybody to the table, and I think that's where, we have a great partnership with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. If anybody's familiar with them, they're one of the leading advocates around promoting vegan diets in society. And so they work with our school food program to pilot a whole semester's worth of once a week vegan options. It wasn't forced on kids, but they could try it. And we got to do plate weight studies and see how they did. And over the course of the semester, kids adapted and said, yeah, these are some ways that based on student feedback, we could make vegan meals that actually kids liked. Awesome, great. But I have a serious freaking problem with the vegan group that called me and said, hey, we love this corner store program. You're bringing fruits and vegetables to food deserts. Do you provide any animal products? And I was like, yeah, dude, we do like a turkey chili, and we do another scratch-cooked sodium soup that has like a milk-based product in it, right? Wouldn't fund us. Like, that's crazy. That's completely insane. So you're going to try to you're not going to invest in a program that's doing more to expose people to fruits and vegetables, provide access to them, because it's not absolutely pure. That's why we love that term, practicing advocates at DC Central Kitchen. We can't afford to be pure, right? We have to be pragmatic and meet people where they are. And yes, we want to see people be more healthy. We would like to see a more sustainable food system. But you can't do that from our perspective on the front lines by being absolutely purists. So, yeah.
I read an interesting article that was, I don't remember the exact title, but basically beggars can't be choosers. And when it comes to food, you have to just take what the food line is giving to you, even if you have like a reaction or you're allergic or something like that. And I was just wondering if you had any of that, or if there's anything. This article was just giving the information. It didn't have a solution, which is always killer. So I'm just wondering, if someone comes in and says, I can't eat X, Y, Z, what's their option?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd be sort of fascinated to see how that article was distributed and who it was actually aimed at, right? I absolutely understand that for many direct service nonprofits operating on limited resources, it's hard for them to run the gamut. I've sort of been amazed over the last 5 years as to the number of our clients or meal recipients at homeless shelters and nonprofits will say, I don't eat pork. Sort of like we used to be thrilled to get a huge ham donation. Now we're like, how do we use this, right? And so now we used all turkey-based ham products, right? And that's a strategic choice we've tried to make to meet our clients increasingly where they're at, right? But I don't think it's crazy to say that, look, in Washington, D.C., right, a school food provider will get about $4 for lunch for every meal that they provide. It's way above the USDA $2.85 a meal reimbursement because DC will add additional values to that. DC Central Kitchen receives $1.75 for a full 4-component meal with a side salad delivered to a homeless shelter. That's a very strange way of evaluating who should get a decent meal, right? Of course, feed kids, right? Hungry kids are called the third rail of American politics. We now have a generation of politicians that like grabbing on the third rails to show how extreme they are, but that when you have that side-by-side comparison, that's sort of crazy. And so since 2006, the city's reimbursement for us for the meals we provide to city-run homeless shelters has gone up 8%. Our meal costs have gone up 70% because of what we're paying for a living wage and our desire to provide healthy options. So we always try to provide, the way our meals are componented out, an opportunity for people to have, no meat protein if they don't want it. There's always a fresh vegetable. There's always a side salad as well. But there's a significant cost to that. And right now, our society hasn't caught up because we think anybody in a homeless shelter should get exactly what they're getting. It should be, safe and sanitary, but the quality isn't necessarily the concern. Yeah.
I was wondering about networking with churches in the area. Washington Interfaith Network is doing a lot of good things. And do you participate with that?
Yeah. We rely primarily on the faith community for really outstanding volunteers. We have 15,000 volunteers a year, about half of whom are from Washington, D.C., and then half of whom are from all across the country and are often faith-based groups coming to D.C. for a week or weekend of service, which is really, really cool. I will say that I think in large parts it's a missed opportunity, right? We were founded saying, are we a faith-based organization? We have faith in people, right? And the idea of being a place where people of all faiths and no faiths could come and have a meaningful experience. My favorite days are when the Romani group comes in and they're a Hindu faith-based group, and the Red Crescent signs up for a volunteer shift on the same day. I think that's really, really awesome. And I think there are only so many places in town where that just sort of happens. We don't plan it, but that's how our registration system works. But I would say that that's a partnership I would love to explore more because it's not extraordinarily robust.
And I think the Pope, at least the spirit, the creative spirit is working with what he's bringing.
Absolutely, and I think it's been a fascinating week to be in Washington, D.C. and be in sort of the direct service world because, again, I think American society likes to pull apart pieces of human existence, right? Economics happens over here, volunteering happens over here, right? Be a completely terrible person from 9 to 5 and crush your opposition and then go home and maybe, feed a nice meal to your kids and volunteer on the weekends. Totally bizarre way to run a society. And I think that's where, Pope Francis, I'm not a Catholic, certainly seems like he's pulling these threads back together to say the way we spend our money, the way we contribute our time, the way we make our money are all tied together in a broader sort of human experiment. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it makes any sense to eliminate the limited capacity we have to meet short-term needs of people who are in dire need and hope that it's going to get better, right? That's why my 2015 New Year's resolution was to be less of a hater, right? I used to be really, really tough on programs that were like, we must feed the children, right? We must provide food for other humans, right? And, increasingly I'm like, well, we can still challenge groups that are focused on the need and use phrases like the poor and the hungry and the indigent to get better and be more inclusive and be more thoughtful about what they can accomplish long term. But we don't have enough resources to be using our resources to tear each other down.
When you talked about the Campus Kitchens program, you mentioned something about using the existing board of directors infrastructure to start similar programs elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a short answer you can give on some of the logistics of how you made that happen?
Yeah, for Campus Kitchens or for the more formal nonprofits side? So we have helped start over 70 community kitchens like ours across the country. We're part of a national network called the Catalyst Kitchens Network, which is designed to help new nonprofits start that reflect all this sort of core pieces of our model, or for groups that are doing, say, just direct feeding, to add job training to what they're doing so they can have the different legs of the stool. So that exists and those resources are out there. Campus Kitchens was a logistical nightmare. Can you imagine saying, we're gonna start a national network where we're gonna have young people as volunteers recovering leftover prepared food, giving it out to people in need? And by the way, we're not gonna have paid staff on site to supervise them, right? The lawyers were concerned. As time went on and we got smarter, certainly we were instrumental in helping to pass the 1996 Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, right? If you're not familiar with that, it's a liability shield for people who donate food with the intention of having it go to a good cause, can't be sued, right? And if anybody saw the John Oliver food waste piece, I'm sure many of you did. If you didn't, watch it. They showed it on a rerun last night. Supposedly all these big mega corporations are terrified of well-funded lawyers on behalf of homeless people who are eating food and got food poisoned, right? Like that army of trial lawyers doesn't exist, okay? So it's just a lazy excuse. But so in fact, for almost 2 decades, donors have been shielded from that. And it's interesting that just now the national networks around food waste are actually starting to catch up. Feeding America is doing a summit here in Washington, D.C. on October 7th on food waste. And Feeding America, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a national food bank network. And we're like, welcome to the party, guys! We really appreciate it. We've been doing this for 25 years. I will probably say something nicer since I'm giving the lunch talk. But finally, at least I think our role on food waste has been, 800,000 pounds a year. It's a drop in the bucket. dudes, right? On an environmental level, on a systemic level. But the fact that we're still here, we haven't had that, and we haven't had that foodborne illness outbreak, right? Which is, food banks can use barcodes to track, if you had one can of tomatoes that was, had, the botulism on it, you can track where that went and you can stop it. We're mulching up 3,000 pounds of donated food every day into 5,000 meals going to 90 different locations across Washington, D.C., and you want me to find that piece of turkey? Not good, right? So, we've been very fortunate, but the fact that we've been able to do that work for 25 years means that we can be an example to say this is possible, you can do this, and at least the fact that people are talking about food waste now, the stigma around, oh, that was one day past the sell-by. It's not like trendy to like eat stuff that's past the sell-by date, right? Now it's kombucha, So I think we're making progress on at least the normative perceptions around that. Yeah.
For the grant writing leg of the organization, do you hire like full-time grant writers, or are they only interns? And if you have the full-time grant writers, what sorts of grants are you looking for? Because I imagine not a lot comes from donations outright.
Interesting. So when I started at DC Central Kitchen as an intern in January 2006, we had about 45 staff. We were all in the basement of that shelter. We had a 2.5 person development team, right? A director of development who primarily answered email. He's my mentor, he kicked ass, but his job was answering email. And a part-time event manager who worked half-time, and then a development associate who had to do everything else, right? And every grant was done from copying and pasting the last grant for the last funder and saying, boy, I hope this funder has the same priorities, put it in the mail. So they were like, hey, great, you're here 30 hours a week, run with this. Fortunately, we've continued to grow. Today we have 150 employees. We earn 60% of our budget, now almost $8 million through social enterprise. At the time when the recession hit, we were earning about $1 million. So the development piece, however, continued to have to grow. Because the problem with having a major contract, say with school food, is that all your costs are reimbursed, right? Nobody pays you up front to serve school meals. You actually get paid for the number of kids who go through the line and take your meal. You document that and then you bill. And then if you're in Washington, D.C., you have to have district government go through the process of actually writing that check. So the problem is, now every 2 weeks, we have to put out $250,000 in payroll because we employ so many people, primarily graduates of our program. Our overhead rates are far below industry standard. Our CEO makes half of what our nearest DC competitor pays their CEO. It's not going to people like me. It's going investing into the hourly staff and salaried staff on the front lines and their health insurance costs, right? But even if they're ultimately getting backfilled by your reimbursement costs of social enterprise, you still need the cash flow on hand to pay these people. So the charitable side of fundraising had to go up too. When I showed up as an intern, we were raising about $2.5 million, primarily through grants. I would say we were raising about $600,000 through grants, and the rest that was the biggest funding stream, and the rest was split across different opportunities. Today we're raising just over $6 million in charitable funding, almost $1.5 million in foundation grants. In the last 2 years, the government has actually said, this thing makes sense. Maybe we should put some money towards what you're doing. So we now receive about $800,000 a year in government funds as well. And those are all primarily grant-driven. The full-time grant manager, proof that you can go and get a degree in nonprofit management and then get a job. She's fabulous. I highly recommend that track if you want to do it. And then I'm still writing grants. And that's the thing about the nonprofit sector is, even if you're a manager, you're doing that full-time, you have to be a full-time doer too. So I'm still writing grants and writing press releases and writing web stories. You just have to wear multiple hats, and they just stack up on top of yourself. So we've been fortunate, and I think that I'll end this fundraising rant soon. And I think with that fortunate nature of being able to grow in a time of severe hardship for the people that we exist to serve and for so many of our partner agencies, it really underscored for us that no nonprofit can fix anything by themselves. And anybody that thinks they can and that they alone are the way, the truth, and the life has something seriously wrong with them. We can't do what we do for our training program, even though we have a 90% job placement rate, if we don't have fabulous partners providing housing for the off hours of that program, because we can't provide that, right? We can't do what we do if we don't have fabulous drug counselors helping people get to that 120-day clean time that we require for people to have at their first day of the program, right? We can't do what we do if people can't access food stamps and SNAP, right? Because that's what they need to rely on during the program, and then they're still going to need it until their first paycheck comes in, and quite frankly, many of them need it afterwards, right? Let's be honest. So we absolutely operate as part of a larger ecosystem, and I think the more money that we raise, and we still are always one grant at the end of every single year from the red and the black. We aren't running surpluses. It's all getting plowed right back into the programs. we know that we also have to keep banging the drum to say the charitable pie just isn't big enough. It hasn't been restored since 2008, and it has to be bigger. It's completely bananas that we're being asked to be downstream of a failed education system, a failed economy that's accruing resources to exactly the wrong types of behaviors and rewarding the wrong business models, and that you expect us to fix that and we should just have more outputs every single year. That's completely crazy. And I think one of the things that has been encouraging, I think, since the recession of 2008 is that nonprofits have said, how many of you have heard of the 501c3 tax status? This is where, all right, we're going to go deep here, all right? Tax-exempt nonprofits, we share the same tax exemption as religious organizations, right? One of the trade-offs of not having to pay income taxes as an organization is that you don't get to make political contributions and you don't get to endorse candidates because somebody decided that was a fair trade, right? And when we thought of charity as being inherently non-political, well, you're just giving food out to poor people. That's not left, that's not right, that's not Republican, that's not Democrat. Guess what? That now is political, right? Our work is inherently political. Food justice is inherently political, and we have to be able to weigh in. Now, we still can't contribute to candidates, even though that apparently money equals speech now. And we still can't endorse candidates. But we absolutely, I think, as a sector, have been more active about weighing in on particular legislative initiatives. I think a lot of people are going to start following Pope Francis's lead and tying faith and religion in a way that isn't simply reactionary, right? That is also progressive, and that's not a party affiliation thing, but I think we all as a society need progress, regardless of how you vote. We clearly don't have it all figured out yet, right? I think we can agree on that. And I'm optimistic that at least the nonprofit sector will finally grow up and start acting like the third sector of our economy, because we are absolutely part of the economy. We need to be part of the political process, and we can't afford to say, to accept people telling us to shut up and sit down and go on the corner and feed the poor people. We good?
Attentive to the time. I was thinking that after his last comments, we should pass the collection plate. My sense is that unless there is a burning question, that Alexander will be around to.
Yep, happy to stick around.
Kibitz after our gathering, and you're welcome to come up to him, and you're also welcome to the welcome table over here with some very concrete examples of DC Central Kitchen.
Tastes far better than concrete. Follow us on Twitter at DCCK. I'm at AXJusticeMoore, and you can reach out anytime. My email is amoore, AMOORE, at dccentralkitchen.org. Love to see you down at DC Central Kitchen.
Let's express our appreciation.